42. Ned Starling led the way out through the secret passage he'd seen Isabel use. It was a slow process since Jonah, Natalie, and Isabel had to be carried. Then Ian had to go out first to dismiss the henchmen Isabel had left guarding the cemetery. "Mum wants you off this island, now," he barked, and that did the trick. When the rest of the group emerged, everyone in the cemetery cheered. "Amy and Dan, you survived!" Nellie screamed. "My kiddos!" "And ours!" Uncle Fisk yelled, just a beat behind her. Then he looked sheepishly at Mr. McIntyre. "Well, they are," he said.
"I can't see. Are Sinead and Ned there? Are Sinead and Ned there?"
Ted hollered. Someone must have told him yes, because then he exploded.
"This is even better than finding a new digit in pi."
"Hammy! Hammy! Hammy!" the Holts cheered in unison.
"Jonah, you're hurt?"
Broderick strained against the ropes binding him.
"Faux show,"
Jonah said, making a pained effort to grin from his sling.
"But wait till you hear the songs I'm going to write from this experience."
Alistair and Sinead insisted that before anyone else could step into the cemetery, they had to defuse the explosives Isabel had laid.
"Quite right,"
the helicopter pilot said approvingly.
"That's the safest way."
Hamilton stood on the beach, shouting across to his family, telling everything that had happened. Or almost everything.
"So, Amy and Dan won in the end, but then Amy had to destroy the prize to protect us all," Hamilton said. "And Dad, I know you're going to be mad that I didn't win everything for Team Holt, but—"
He waited, but Eisenhower didn't start screaming the way Hamilton expected. Eisenhower opened his mouth, winced, swallowed hard, then tried again.
"Winning isn't everything," Eisenhower said faintly. "Sometimes, just knowing your family's safe and healthy and alive is even better."
"Did Vince Lombardi say that?" Reagan asked. "Or Shakespeare?"
"No," Eisenhower said. "I did."
Once everyone was untied, Amy and Nellie hugged like they hadn't seen each other in a million years. Dan didn't want to get involved with that, not when he really wanted to talk to Uncle Fisk and Mr. McIntyre.
"Later," Dan thought, "after everyone else leaves."
Frustrated, he wandered toward the Starlings. Ted was reaching out to touch his sister's face.
"I heard what Hamilton said about the serum being destroyed,"
Ted was saying.
"Don't worry, Sinead. It doesn't matter. Ned and I will be fine anyhow."
"Oh, but—"
Sinead began.
"No, listen,"
Ted said.
"While I was tied up here with everyone else, I started thinking about those experimental surgeries they'd offered Ned and me. I came up with a few new things to suggest to the doctors, so it's not so risky. Reagan Holt even drew the diagrams for me."
He pulled a sheaf of papers out of his jacket pocket and held them out to her.
"Look, but we can—"
Dan began, leaning in toward the Starlings. Sinead looked up from the diagrams and shook her head warningly.
"Ted's way is better," she said. "If the surgeries work, this helps lots of people, not just Ned and Ted. And there won't be the same side effects and complications. I mean, I saw Isabel Cabra in action, and she only had part of the serum."
"I guess,"
Dan said. He was suddenly even more aware of the papers he'd tucked into his own pockets. How could paper feel so heavy? Jonah almost passed out while the others lifted him into the helicopter. He tried to relax as they settled him into the back seat, but then he stiffened again.
"Dad!"
he screamed.
"The vandalism charges from the Globe. Will somebody try to arrest me when we get to the hospital?"
"Oh, no," Broderick said. "I almost forgot. All the accusations were dropped. Miss Pluterbottom recanted."
"Yo, Miss I Tell Nothing But the Truth Pluterbottom lied?"
Jonah asked, astounded.
"For me?"
"No,"
Broderick said.
"She didn't lie. She said the truth changed. She went to the authorities and said she discovered you were a nice young man who would never intentionally damage anything connected to the Bard."
The truth changed, Jonah thought. And I changed. I found my true self. Miss Pluterbottom's my homie,
Jonah murmured drowsily. They were taking off now, the helicopter rising into the sky.
I think I'll ask her to help me stage a hip-hop version of Romeo and Juliet. It can be a crossover hit. Want to help, too? I can't be a teen sensation forever, you know. Gotta start plotting the next step, the next phase. Whatever you want,
Broderick said. They flew higher into clouds. Jonah's mind was getting cloudy, too. Maybe he started dreaming again. Or maybe he really did hear his father say, over the thumping of the helicopter blades, "And we'll tell your mother whatever you want about the serum, too." Sinead took off in her aircraft with Alistair and a still unconscious Isabel. This left the Starling boys to go to the hospital with Ian and Natalie in Jonah's yacht. "You know how to steer a yacht?" Mr. McIntyre asked Ian worriedly. "I was born knowing how to steer a yacht," Ian said. Then a stricken look came over his face. "But do you suppose Jonah prepaid the full amount for renting this? Once my dad hears what Natalie and I did, he'll cancel our credit cards."
You mean we're poor now?
Natalie gasped. "Penniless," Ian said grimly. "Actually," Mr. McIntyre said, "I should have mentioned this before the others left. Grace had an addendum to her will regarding everyone who made it through the gauntlet. There were 8 of you. You will all receive double the amount you turned down to get the first clue."
"It was $1 million originally," Ian said. "So Natalie and I each get $2 million? I suppose we could live on that."
Natalie beamed.
"That is such a relief," she said. "Being poor wasn't quite as bad as I thought it would be, but still—" "You were only poor for about 2 seconds," Dan protested, rolling his eyes.
Dan, the $2 million apiece, that would be for us, too," Amy said dazedly.
"Oh, yeah," Dan thought. $2 million apiece. $4 million total.
He couldn't take it in. Not while he had papers rustling in his pocket that contained a priceless secret. Ian, Natalie, Ned, and Ted left. The Holts screamed when they heard Hamilton had won $2 million. Then they began shrieking that meant they could go to some world-famous soccer game that was going to be played in Ireland in just an hour. They left too, though Hamilton kept hanging out the window of their boat, holding his hand to his ear, fingers outstretched, signaling,
"Call me. Let me know what happens. I've still got your back,"
was the last thing he shouted out to them. And then only madrigals were left on the island. Dan marched right up to Uncle Fisk and Mr. McIntyre.
"Now what?" he asked. "What did Grace want us to get the serum for?"
Chapter 43.